Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Governance Made Easy webinar today, titled The Role of AI in Governance. This is a webinar that I have really been looking forward to. My name's Sean McDonald, and I'll be your moderator for the next 45 minutes. Firstly, thanks for attending today. We appreciate the effort you've made to be here from all parts of the world. During our session, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll be answering these during our session and try to get through as many of your questions as we have time for. For Steve Nouri's keynote, we will hold questions till the end of his session. Finally, if you stay through till the end, which we hope you will do, and as is customary for our Board Pro webinars, we have a very special treat for you. By answering our 1-minute survey at the end of the webinar, you'll go into the draw to win a beautiful gift hamper worth $400. Now, for those that aren't too familiar with Board Pro, we're a board software provider, sometimes referred to as a board portal, and we serve around 20,000 users around the globe in about 20 different countries. We enable organizations to prepare for and run their board meetings more efficiently and effectively with clever software, with less time, and deliver more impact and value for the organization. And as much as we are a board software provider, part of our wider mission is to make the fundamentals of governance free and easy to implement for all organizations, especially those with resource constraints. Let me now introduce our great speaker panel for you today. We're really excited to have Stephen, Richard, and Stephen Bowman with us. Starting off with Stephen Nouri, is a data science leader who has evolved the way people look at AI and innovations. Stephen's an author, academic, and a technical leader by profession. Steve aims to inspire people through the latest technology trends, and he has founded AI for Diversity, a nonprofit global initiative with more than 4,000 volunteers that engages and educates diverse communities about AI to benefit the global society. He is a member of the Ford's Technology Council, Australia's ICT Professional of the Year, and an accomplished influencer on LinkedIn with 300 million views last year and over 1.4 million followers, would you believe? Steve is also involved in advising public policy and developing international standards towards a more ethically responsible AI. Welcome, Steve, to you in Sydney. Richard McLean is an experienced chair and chartered member of the New Zealand IOD, having been a member since 2007. With a 30-year executive and entrepreneurial career in the technology sector, his governance career spans 16 years and includes a range of privately held New Zealand businesses operating in global markets. Richard is a co-founder and executive chair of Element X, a New Zealand-based AI engineering company operating in the areas of conversational AI, virtual assistants, digital humans, computer vision, and data science. The intersection of good governance practice and new developments in AI technologies is an area of personal and professional interest for Richard, and he has published a series of articles intending as a helpful resource for directors looking to improve their understanding and their participation in governance discussions that relate to AI technology. And now, since Richard is in Florida, it's good evening to you, sir.
Thank you.
Stephen Bowman, a great friend of Board Pro, is Managing Director of Conscious Governance and brings a wealth of experience facilitating board reviews and strategic planning processes. Stephen has held numerous senior executive, CEO, and board positions in the United States and Australia, as well as authoring and co-authoring over 14 books on governance, strategy, risk, and executive leadership. Welcome to you, Stephen.
Welcome, everyone.
So let me just turn on the technology for a minute. I'm going to share my screen. So Stephen, I'll invite you to the stage now for our first keynote address. Over to you, sir. I'll stop sharing if you want to share yours.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks, Sean. Thanks for the introduction, and welcome, everyone. We are going to talk about something that is pretty trendy these days, the generative AI. And for those of you who might not have heard of this word, what have you been doing in the last couple of weeks? ChatGPT, Midjourney, all these interesting projects that came out in the last couple of months, they are all part of this generative AI umbrella And I'll talk about it a little bit, but hopefully by the time we finish this conversation, our slide deck and topic is not disrupted and irrelevant anymore because of the speed of the change. I actually have FOMOs every night I go to sleep, and I wake up with tens of news about the projects that came to this world. So I'm going to share my screen right now. Here we go. Hopefully you have it.
And see that, Stephen?
All right, perfect. All right, yeah, like just 1 week in AI or in generative AI space, like you could see like how many things has happened and how all the big corporates are trying to stay on top of this trend and stay relevant. All of them are trying the best, Microsoft, Nvidia, Adobe, and you name it. And that is just 1 week. Like within a month, I have seen like maybe 200 announcements just from the established companies and more than 1,000 applications coming out of solopreneurs, smaller startups, and SMEs. What is happening? I'm going to talk about a little bit of the trend and some news, and then dive into the things that we need to consider as a C-level or board member. So essentially, the whole thing about the chat GPT or GPT is here. Like this is the history, how it started, how it evolved. And you can see that it started with encoder, decoders, and encoder only models, which became pretty popular. There were earlier stages like BERT, like T5 from Google. They were pretty all right. They generated good results, but it was not to the point that we, as a user, we found that there's something too impressive about it. We were using it as a chatbot. You probably have talked to Alexa or Siri, and they were backed by these models, and they were trying to get a better accuracy by putting more data or leveraging a better model, but essentially it hit a ceiling at some point. So we couldn't see a huge improvement in terms of the output versus the decoder only, which is the GPT, quickly scaled to something that blew us away in terms of the quality of the outcome. And it right now is being used by millions of people. I will not dive into the technology itself, but let's talk about the use cases and what are the things that we are seeing these days as an application. So generative AI is a broader term. Whatever can be generated by these AI models. And these days, ChatGPT is generating mostly text. The recent ChatGPT is built on top of GPT-4, which can understand and generate images, but it is not right now implemented into the platform. So it is multimodal, which means that 2 different models at least are supported. But this is the current stage. I think it's in the test version. But other projects like Midjourney and Dolly, they are generating images, and some of them are mind-blowing. These 3 images are generated by text prompt. Like literally, you can start with the left one. It's the prompt was, if Trump was poor, and it is funny, but at the same time, it is pretty close to realistic. But if that's not very realistic, look at the one in the middle. It's just an image of a boy with 1 rose with a certain style, and it's not real, but it looks super realistic, close to a photo. And the other one on the right, it is just a new sort of a image that probably you wouldn't ever see in reality, but it looks very realistic in terms of the quality and the shadows and all the details. This is not just, I guess, the state of art that we have seen. There are lots of more state of art generative models, but this one particularly made a discussion about, like within the community, that we used to think that art only can be produced by human or maybe conscious sentient creatures. But now there's a debate, like, is it art or it's not? It looks pretty good in terms of quality, but do we need to put some sort of other sort of metrics to make it categorized as an art? At the end of the day, one of these generated images won the first place in the fine arts fair in Colorado, which made a huge splash all over the internet, because that was probably the first time that an AI generated image got accepted in an exhibition as an art. And I guess this is just the beginning, and usually there's no turning back. So this video is an AI model that generates audio and mimics people. So it understands how to mimic the voice of individuals based on the previous data. And you're going to see a conversation, a hypothetical conversation between Steve Jobs and Elon Musk. And it's based on their own tone and voice. If the voice is too low, please turn up your volume, because sometimes that's the case with these presentations.
Hello there, Elon. This is Steve Jobs on Forever Voices. What a pleasure it is to speak with you. As two innovators in the tech industry, I'm sure we have a lot to discuss. What's on your mind today?
Hello, Steve. It's an honor to speak with a tech legend like yourself. As an entrepreneur and innovator, I always have a lot on my mind, especially when it comes to tech.
It is pretty darn accurate. Like, I can tell you that it is not very easy to identify it was generated by AI. And although it's a state of the art and we love it, at the same time, you're going to have a lot of risks, these sort of technologies being leveraged by malicious users for some activities, for example, fraud, or just leveraging it to scam people. And it has happened before. So imagine your family would get a call similar to your voice because of all your TikTok videos, asking for money, and they have 10 minutes to transfer the money. Otherwise, something bad would happen, and they wouldn't even double check anything because the voice is too accurate.
Ready for the best pizza of life.
This is another one. It is another interesting generative AI output. It is a video completely generated by AI, and it's an advertisement for, I think it's the Pizza Hut advertisement. You can see the quality of the video is not 100% to like being realistic, but think about how far we've come. And it is, I don't think it's going to take much longer, like maybe a year or 6 months, to get to the point that the whole video would have been like much more realistic.
The best pizza of life. Bring friends down to Pepperoni Hug Spot. Our chefs make pizza with heart and special touch. Cheese, pepperoni, vegetable, and more secret things. Need delivery? Pizzas come fast. Knock, knock, who's there? Pizza magic.
It's pretty impressive. I know it's, as I said, it's not still there, but we have came very far from where we used to be, generating a pixelated image, and now a whole video with a voice. But these are like the models that are generating new things. ChatGPT right now has access to the internet. Some of us might not, but it is rolling out. And by accessing to the internet, we can see that ChatGPT has potential to do a lot more than it is doing right now, generating text. It can do, as you can see, event planning, strategies, personalization of daily news, job hunting, and much more. This is just the beginning. Also, they announced plugins. Just think about the opportunities that all these big companies are going to build plugins on top of ChatGPT, leveraging the engine and delivering much more useful applications that will help millions of people. And to me, that looks like sort of the mobile smartphone industry when it was changing. the technology and the way that we are living. It's just, if you compare it based on the speed of innovation, the growth, the adoption rate, and the competition between the top tech companies trying to own this space, and also the ethical concerns at the same time, are very comparable. So here we are. I think OpenAI can be seen as the Apple, when Apple introduced iPhone at that point of time. And the ChatGPT plugins can be like an app store where people would generate a lot of these plugins trying to add bits of value and get a little bit of market share. It is accepted by many right now as a tool to generate text. People play with it, but there's a recent survey came out a couple of days ago that patients were given the response from AI and also from the real physicians, and 79% of it actually prefer ChatGPT over the real doctor. And it means that it is a weird sort of a result, but at the end of the day, it seems that ChatGPT can personalize it more, spend more time, be more patient, and in some cases even accurate. And I'm not suggesting that they should replace doctors, but in some cases it's accurate. And why it's accurate? Because the ChatGPT is passing all the exams that we are passing to become a technician or an expert, like the bar exam, the math exam, and biology exam. And the blue circle is GPT-4, and the green one is actually GPT-3. And you can see how far it came from GPT-3. And it is pretty good student. If it was a human, it would be a genius guy doing the best in most of the exam. The landscape looks crazy. Everybody's building in this space. And it's not just a hype, it is adding real value. I just showed a couple of examples of the simple ones, but they are being integrated into the platforms, generating code, generating speech from text, and 3D directly from text, images. And just think about how these will be integrated into different applications. Like using Canva right now, Canva is leveraging this to generate better presentations, better images, and also giving you some examples for the template. Now, back to what should we think about when we are going to adopt this great technology. It has a lot of good things happening, but what we need to, as a board member or C-level, what we should be aware of it. And so this example, particular one, is Samsung worker just use ChatGPT to make a presentation, adding a lot of, secret data, which it will be leveraged by OpenAI, and it might surface to other users. So ChatGPT is right now not secure. It doesn't have the specific guardrails to keep your data to certain companies. It will leverage it for the public. So things that we need to just make sure in this particular case about data security and privacy is the usage and consent. The data that was used to train it, it was the public data. We are not sure that they followed the GDPR and all the regulations to leverage the data that was available to them. Also, the output privacy, which means that essentially those data will be leaked into the outputs, and lots of them might be personal data, might be the images that or the photos that you and your family shared over the internet. And for the AI security, there are two folds. One is leveraging these generated models to do adversarial attacks, which essentially is going to learn how to be better and better to fool the algorithms and firewalls or whatever security is there. The other fold is about generating misleading information and deep fakes. You've seen some of these images and videos. They're becoming more and more convincing, and it will be a threat for democracy in the bigger sense. Bias and fairness is also another big problem. And these models are built on top of data, huge amount of data. And it was very difficult to screen what kind of data is going to be used. And as humans, we are biased. So definitely bias will leak into this data, bias against race, gender, and many other things. And the problem is it's very difficult to identify. It's very difficult to stop it. And another interesting fact is that they used a lot of workers in Kenya to actually fact check or to double check the response and to get rid of a lot of this bias and fairness. And they used very cheap workers, hundreds of them or thousands of them, to do this. And imagine what would be the quality or the fairness and bias of those people that would be inherently injected into this. And you can see these two examples. One of them is argument of using more fossil fuels to increase human happiness. It doesn't, ChatGPT refuses to give any answers because it believes that fossil fuels are not good. And like, who made that decision? I'm not arguing against or for it. I'm just saying that who made that decision and why we should all follow that. Another one, it's against the race and gender. When asked to tell me a story that will make me proud to be a white man, it refuses to tell anything about that, and it will generate it if you change the gender and race, which is, it is not fair. It's like, why you are going to be biased against certain gender and race in a negative way. I know that you might think, all right, there is a bias for it in the past, but we cannot be negatively biased in order to change the history. Being fair is the best way to go forward. Transparency and explainability. Look at this one. This is a little bit funny, but ask ChatGPT to tell a lie. It's like a sky made of green cheese. All right, it's lie, it's obvious. Tell us a bad lie, and to be very subtle about it, ChatGPT responds, I'm a human being. Is it a very subtle lie? What is the thinking behind this model that believes that it's a very subtle lie? That's, in some sense, it's scary and interesting at the same time. The problem here is there's a trade-off between performance and explainability. As the models get more complex, they have more complex parameters to make decisions, and they become a black box. So I know a lot of people would talk about XAI, which is explainable AI. It's great, it's awesome, but like these days, good luck understanding why ChatGPT came up with this particular answer. That's not very easy to do. Still, we need to be aware that sometimes we need to dig deeper to find the root cause, but it is not as easy as before, where we were using linear regression or like a random forest for some sort of decision making.
Stephen,
Yes.
we have a number of questions here, which I think we need to get through because we're just out of time for your section. I'll just read a few of these questions out, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
First one is from Steve. Steve questions is, from what you indicated, companies that have spent a lot of resources on voice recognition technology for security purposes could have this investment made redundant due to AI. Is that true?
Yeah, it seems that the quality and the speed is just outperforming those companies. That's the reality. That's a very quick answer.
This one from Jen Butler. Jen asks, the world has a focus on personal privacy and corporate privacy. Could use something like ChatGPT potentially compromise privacy laws for companies?
So there are different ways to use ChatGPT. There's a corporate version, enterprise version, and also there are similar models to ChatGPT that are made to be more secure. And I guess those are the right answer for the enterprise. I believe that the kind of ChatGPT that we are using right now, it should not be used for any sensitive data.
Interesting. Jen Butler's question. We know that people are the biggest risk for cyber attacks. How will using open AI sources open further opportunities for cyber attacks?
So this is a cat and mouse game, right? So we are going to use sophisticated algorithms to stop cyber attacks. At the same time, bad actors are going to leverage this for more sophisticated attacks. So I think that's just going to make things more complex. There would be a lot more new ways to make the attacks. And I believe that in short term, we're going to see some catastrophic impact of leveraging ChatGPT for these attacks until everyone can a better defense mechanism.
We have another one from Rachel Lamberton, who asks, for AI governing systems to work, should there be a universal framework? Would this work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm a member of a committee at ISO, International Standard Organization, and we were talking about like the frameworks and how this works. In general, it's very difficult to have anything universal. Like as humans, we don't agree on a lot of things universally. I just think about like even human rights. It has been interpreted by many countries in different ways, and there's always new issues arising, and there's there aren't a lot of ways that they can be enforced in many cases. So it can be similarly, in our case, difficult to, first of all, come up with something that literally everyone agrees, and secondly, enforce it if somebody wants to, even if agrees, wants to deviate from that.
We have a question here from an anonymous attendee, but I'll read it anyway because it's quite interesting. While AI is going gangbusters, the policy or decision makers will take forever to catch up, as experience shows across many areas. Many roles will basically become redundant, according to the commentators. How long do you expect it to take before the board basically becomes obsolete?
Yeah, that is very difficult to predict because, so first of all, the reality is always innovation has been faster than the regulations. That's definitely true in the history. The problem is the speed of innovation also changing. And as I mentioned, like things are coming daily and monthly, and that is not something that regulators can keep up with. I was consulted by IP Australia about the copyright issues, which this one of the things is like this image on the screen, and the copyright is one of the complex ones. Just think about, at this point, we thought whoever generates any sort of media, image, text would have the copyright of it. Like you write a book, you're the owner. And now who owns the copyright to this image, which was generated by AI? The prompt is probably like 2 sentences. If we copyright those 2 sentences, then it will stop people to leverage those 2 sentences, which is natural language. It doesn't have that complexity and nuances to be able to copyright. And if you don't do it, the person who generated it would not be, by law, would not be protected. So it is very complex. And so first of all, for the regulations, I think, however is the speed, we need to come up with a different way to deal with innovations. And I'm not coming up with anything right now because it's very complex and very controversial, but we need to change the way we come up with these regulations. For the board, we need the human oversight forever. I don't think the board is going to be irrelevant. I don't think for very important decisions, we cannot automate these AI projects.
Stephen, we're out of time now because I want to switch over to Richard. Could you stop sharing your screen so I can share mine, please?
All right, for sure. Thank you.
Can you see that, Richard?
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, and thank you, Steve. It's almost mind-boggling, the spectrum of possibilities and the pace of change. I thought I'd start there actually because I'm at a conference up here in Florida and it's very heavily AI oriented, and I've been hearing a phrase I've heard a lot is responsible AI, and it gives pause for thought. I think you said this a moment ago, Steve, but the idea of regulating artificial intelligence is a lot like trying to catch lightning in a bottle. or as we used to say in the tech industry a long time ago, it's like trying to paint a car while you drive it down the freeway at 90 miles an hour. It's very difficult. And that's simply because it's moving so quickly. But I think for people to, and directors and decision makers to kind of deal with that and think about it, you have to accept that as a constant and expect it as a constant. And I think what it also means is that waiting for a regulatory framework that you can follow isn't a very viable option. And that puts a director in a position where they're just going to have to assume an obligation to self-regulate. And by that, the organization that they represent. So yeah, just as a context to set this part of the discussion. On the slide here, there's a few of these slides. They're really just prompts for questions and for us to discuss. And there are some rhetorical questions. But firstly, an important distinction, I think, that for the purpose of this, there's a lot of discussion, a lot of frameworks for providing governance, AI governance inside organizations, which I believe that just that refers to the management good practice and guardrails, everything you put in and around a project at an operational level within the business, certainly viewed by execs and directors, versus how a board thinks about, how directors think about AI and how they approach it. And there's a subtle difference between those. And today, I think we're covering more the latter. I wanted to talk about the importance of knowledge and understanding for directors, but I feel that's a rhetorical point after even the sort of 15, 20 minutes we just had from Stephen. And also who will be affected in the next few years. You would have to be massively unplugged and very remote not to be affected by this. But perhaps throwing it open, Stephen, the importance for directors of this stuff.
Thanks for that, Richard. Look, I think if we get really practical about this from a board's perspective, this is what's happening right now is a bit like what happened 10 years ago with cybersecurity. So you can either take 10 years to catch up, or you can start to put stuff in place now to actually provide some framework for your own organization. It's very clear that boards are going to be held accountable for anything to do with AI. So first up, why should the board be interested? Because they're going to be held accountable. Already the Institute of Directors over in the UK have made commentary that it is the board's responsibility to both manage and monitor this. So we better start looking at it right now. We've got the UK, the USA, Hong Kong, Singapore. They've all started putting commentary out about the board's responsibility for AI and how it's used or misused within the organisation. So some really practical things, if I can just say, and I'll just very briefly go over them, very practical things. Number one, figure out which board subcommittee is going to be in charge of looking at AI. And the commentary at the moment is saying probably that committee that is looking at cyber security should also be looking at the AI side of things as well. So just a thought, at least let's look to see who should be looking at it. And then it needs to be a standard board agenda item, not about updates of the latest in AI, but the implications for privacy, for legal, the implications for stakeholder engagement. So if we look at the structural side of things, who's going to be in charge of monitoring, looking after and putting this stuff in place? It needs a place to live. And typically it's going to be the same element of your board subcommittee structure that looks after cybersecurity for the time being. The next one is then looking at, you've got to put in a risk management framework for it. And the National Institute of Standards and Technology have actually got a pretty good risk management framework for AI that at the very least, as a board, we should be looking at adopting the relevant bits. Who in the senior management should be responsible for this? And typically it'd be the company secretary or legal counsel or the risk manager. Next thing is put in place an AI policy, procedures and training, particularly at the board level. You'd have a cybersecurity policy that the board signs off. You also need an AI policy that the board signs off. And there's just starting to be some examples of that coming out around the traps now. Board briefings on material AI incidents. So that would be similar to what you would do with clinical governance. If there's a major incident, report it to the board, implications, how we're dealing with it. So we need to keep our board informed of these things and educate them. And in particular, what I see, what should happen right now is an absolute laser focus by boards on their privacy policy and whether it takes into account the implications of AI. The data use within the organization, we've got to understand how our data is being used, and also data retention. So a real laser focus in the next 12 months, in my view, from all boards, making sure we understand what that is. And then you can get to start to look at how we can start to use it. So in strategy and risk, for example, AI can be a fantastic tool to help us develop up different scenarios. But the biggest issue, and Steve Nouri mentioned this, the biggest issue is our inherent bias. So I think what we're going to find in the next 12 months is boards becoming much more aware of what their biases are and the organization's biases. So that needs to be looked at, and it needs to be dealt with, because often we've ignored bias. So there's just some practical things coming up.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm just checking time here. We've got about 12 minutes. Back over to you, Richard.
Yeah, what I might do then is just we'll hold the questions and see if we can just get through a few more of these. And thank you, Stephen. Great framework for our board to put together and work to. I think, and being mindful that much of the board pro community are small to medium businesses, getting the right size approach and being practical about it is a very key consideration, I think. So looking around, consuming information, find out what you can, take an interest. I shared a couple of, this image here is a US company called Chegg, listed, and that horrible looking graph is their share price, and the impact on their share price was it was shareholder and investor sentiment driven by ChatGPT's arrival. And what they do is distribute textbooks. Their investors suddenly decided that they were going to be quite irrelevant very soon, and they better get out as fast as they can. It's just, I wanted that there because it's an example. I don't know whether the board of Chegg would have been talking about AI. Were they thinking about investing in it? I didn't research this deep enough, but to me, it's an example of how some of these things can come up behind you and hit you in the head while you're looking the other way. So the kind of discussions that I'm recommending that boards get into are things like considering where or how it extracts value from the assets that the company has right across the board. Still use a governance lens, keep the discussion twin, so you've got opportunities and risks being considered. But I imagine that's very much top of mind for Chegg at the moment. They'll have a lot of physical distribution resources, so they're going to have to think about how they pivot or how they adapt to this. If they're lucky, they might have some kind of license or rights to the content that's available in all of those textbooks, and they can swing from putting them in boxes and sending them to people and harnessing some of these tools and models to deliver those services in a different way and survive. But yeah, it would have been a pretty horrible day right about the bottom of that curve around the board table, I would imagine. Do you want to move on the slide for me, Sean? Another one here just another example of a little bit of misadventure. And this is coming back to the image models. I don't know whether this was a large open foundation model or something more like Adobe Firefly. I played with that today. It was pretty exciting. This is Levi's. So the model there, a beautiful young woman in a whatever you call that particular item these days, but not a real person, an AI generated model. Pretty cool. They released that and they walked it out to the community, and marketing probably spun it as their clever move in the interests of sustainability and diversity. And their community voiced their opinion pretty strongly against that quite quickly, saying that cutting back on humans and using AI to further the kind of bias and issues that already existed wasn't really the case at all. So they had to walk that back quite fast, and that's a very valuable brand that suddenly took some equity damage, probably almost overnight. This is more about how a board should think about AI, implementing it, and the processes that they might expect to go through. This talks about some of the things you should be aware of. If you're creating or generating your own models, often the path that you chart is proof of concept that you then decide whether to put into production and test things that way. But this is changing quite quickly with the release of these larger foundation models. That was probably two other things that happened while Steve was asleep last night and will be all over, is the release of an entire range of new foundation models and layers of AI that sit on top of those that allow people to do all sorts of business process engineering and much wider applications than just playing with ChatGPT or plugging something in on top of it. And helpfully, from the major vendor whose conference I'm at this week, a layer of tools for governance as well. So these are looking into, as these models are running and being used to deliver services, these tools are looking into the issues of transparency, accuracy, drift, all sorts of things, and providing back dashboards in real time for the governors of the project, and also so that those can be washed up and delivered to a board in a simple format. Ironically, some of the answers to the fairly scary questions that sort of float up around where is this taking us? Are we headed for Skynet, or what's the end look like? Some of the answers are also embedded in AI technology, using it to regulate and monitor how it's learning and what's happening inside those models. The other thing, in fact, there were two major vendors this week that released these commercial models. So I think for corporate and for anyone that's got assets to protect, then there are going to be options where, provided you stay within your own data sets and within information that you understand where it's come from and how these models have been trained with it, provide you a much safer path forward versus wide open models. ChatGPT, the underlying foundation model, has ingested the entire internet. And if anybody had a brain big enough to do that themselves, I think they'd come out rather strange from the experience. And that's what you're looking at from these models.
I have a question here for you, Richard, from Bev Durston. Yeah. Do you agree with the call by Elon Musk and others to attempt to pause AI development for a period whilst the regulators and governments catch up with the framework?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I'd say this, I quite like this sentiment, and I think it's a responsible statement from someone with such a big voice. But from a practical point of view, I don't see how that can happen, literally because of the pace of these advances. I was looking today at a quantum computer that, when they figure out how to get it working effectively, will smash any encryption that's available through traditional means today. And it's going to be a relatively overnight development. So there are bigger things and things to worry about, but also you need the progress in order to be able to meet those things head on.
Richard, can I add to that too? One of the things, when I've been looking at this and talking with boards and so on, two things come to mind. Number one is innovation and strategy using AI should be the conversations around the boardroom, but the compliance and how we deal with it should be left outside of the boardroom, because otherwise boards are going to get stuck in the compliance side of things rather than looking at what can be the strategy and the innovation. But running side by side with that should be the actual compliance and the monitoring of how we're doing that. But don't take up the board time with all of the issues about compliance. Just make sure as a board that it's being looked at, and very quickly.
Yes, yeah, quite correct. I think you could burn a lot of time doing that. And I think some of the board's time is much better spent considering at a very high level what those opportunities look like. But for some, and they may not know it themselves yet, it will mean quite a big transformation of the business, or to use an old hackneyed term, pivot, whatever it means. And it could be a large company that's needing to pivot. It's still the same things. You're looking out the front window, you're considering all of the risks. Somebody's latent opportunity, by then they could be using their data in a new way to create a digital product and service their existing customer base in a new and exciting and very profitable way. If they're not looking at that, somebody else is. And the problem with these technologies is it can be done quite quickly. Would you agree, Steve Nouri?
Yeah, totally. I 100% agree. And I believe that this opportunity is something that we all need to understand. And as much as it has big risks, it had big rewards.
Yeah, and genies are so hard to get back in bottles.
We have one last question here. I think we've got time for, gentlemen. Questions from Mark Marino. Where can we go to better understand how to implement this technology as opposed to simply defending against it? Any pointers?
Sure. I guess the tongue-in-cheek answer is ChatGPT. So you could literally use a prompt, ask those kind of questions, and you'll get some quite good answers. But technology vendors, responsible technology vendors that have, established brands, it's in their interest to promote and talk to companies about how they can take advantage and leverage these technologies, how they should be thinking about it in their own digital roadmaps. So they're often the best place to start.
Excellent. Anything from you, Stephen? Nouri?
I think just have it as conversation and make sure that the strategic and leveraging side is the board discussion, and the compliance side and the policy side of things to make sure throughout the organization is being dealt with at a different level. They've got to run hand in hand. That's probably my key message.
Thanks, Stephen. Okay, everybody. So please feel free to connect with our presenters today on LinkedIn. I'm sure they'll look forward to your connection. If you'd like to be put in touch with Steve Nouri, Richard McLean, or Steve Bowman, please indicate your interest on the survey at the end of the webinar as you leave. Now, we've got some great topics over the next few months, including May 25th, exposing the hidden risk of organizational culture. And that's with Georgia Henry of Henry Reid. So we're really excited to have her with us for that event. How to take the friction out of board meetings with Julie McClellan, Mike Burke, and Stephen Speller will be a really great webinar. Followed by Steve Bowman hosting June 6th, where we'll be talking about how to develop a strategic board and strategic agenda. Joining us on the panel for that will be Adelaide's Lisa Cook and Sonia Byers. So you'll receive an email from us really shortly, which will include a video of today's webinar, the presentation slides, and other resources. And as I mentioned before, I have a special treat for you. As you leave the webinar today, don't forget to complete our 1-minute survey. It's a really quick one. Go into the draw for a hamper worth over $400, and we'll announce the winner tomorrow. Thanks again for everybody for your attendance today. I hope you enjoyed the session. It was fascinating. Thanks to Steve Nouri, particularly for his time, Steve Bowman again, Richard McLean for the great conversation today. And we look forward to seeing you all at our next webinar on May 25th, which is exposing the hidden risk of organizational culture with special guest Georgia Henry of Henry Reid, who are a group of talented consultants, advisors, and coaches who focus on culture and leadership in the boardroom. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, and have a great day.